Hi, everyone. Brick City Brown Chick coming at you with another episode. And today I want to talk about three famous people who passed away last week. As you all know, I don't do celebrity blogs or gossip or anything like that. There are tons of people out there who do that kind of content. But when significant people in the culture, in pop culture, die, I like to talk about them, of course, from my perspective. So, first, we're going to start with Ananda Lewis. If you're of the Gen X generation, if her name particularly doesn't ring a bell, if you saw a picture of her, there's a 90% chance that you know you've seen her. And she was a MTV personality. She did Hot Topics and Total Request Live. And after she left MTV, she did a show called BET Teen Summit. And that was a very significant show in the late 80s, early 90s. It was a time when people generally sort of paid no mind to teenagers, especially to the Gen X teenagers. We were sort of out of sight, out of mind. And that program addressed topics that were important to teenagers, and in this case, specifically to Black teenagers. And she was amazingly good at getting teens to open up and to really talk about what was on their mind because she was only a few years older than they were. So I think they felt comfortable talking to someone close to their age. For the last almost 10 years, probably, she had struggled with breast cancer. And she died last week at age 52, which I'm going to be 55 in a few weeks. So 52 is incredibly young. And so she was therefore in her early 40s when she started her breast cancer journey. She found the lump herself doing a self exam, which I strongly recommend women of all ages do from your teens onward. It is super important because though breast cancer usually strikes women in their 50s, 60s, there are cases of women, especially if you have a family history, striking much earlier. So hers was much earlier. Unfortunately, by the time the doctors diagnosed it, she was already stage 3. And so in her journey, she decided to go the alternative medicine route. She did not want to do conventional therapy. She didn't want to do chemo, radiation, have the double mastectomy. She didn't want to do any of that. So she went the alternative medicine route. Unfortunately, her cancer progressed to stage 4, and she did die last week. Her perspective on the cancer was super encouraging to a lot of cancer patients. She kind of said, these bodies are on loan. We all know that. So, how we die and when we die are the two things we don't know. But it's going to happen for all of us. So, my journey is what it is. That this is what I have to handle and to come to terms with it. And from all accounts from her friends, she had come to terms with her impending death, and she was peaceful in the choice she had made to go with alternative medicine. So that is comforting for her friends and her family. Why she is significant to me is because I have gone through breast cancer. I have not personally had it myself yet. Knock on wood. Hopefully I won't. But a few years ago, maybe 3 years ago now, I had a breast cancer scare. And lots of women have those. I found a lump. I went to the doctor. The doctor said, yep, it's a lump. You need to go to have a mammogram. Had the mammogram. They said, yep, it's a lump, and we need to do a biopsy. And anybody who knows me knows that that word just set me off because it involves needles. And it involves me being awake for the needles, and that's just not cool. So I had to decide if I was going to have the biopsy or not. And that was not an easy decision for me because, again, needles, and I have to be awake. But I knew I needed to do it. So I had the biopsy. Thankfully, it was benign and it ended there. But when somebody says biopsy and cancer, it freaks you out. Or particularly, it freaks me out because there is a ton of cancer in my family. All types of cancer: esophagus cancer, prostate cancer, cervical cancer, stomach cancer. The C word is a big issue in my family. So that really stressed me out, but I'm glad I got through it and I was able to move forward. The cancer that I've dealt with in recent years for somebody I know is my mother. My mother had breast cancer about 10 years ago now. Now, my mother will be 91 years old this year. So I was dumbfounded by the fact that she had breast cancer. I was like, how is that possible? She's in her 80s. Menopause was 30 years ago. So I sat down with her oncologist when I went to one of her appointments, and the oncologist said, one of the things they don't talk about with women that they need to is that in postmenopausal women, sometimes the cells, the estrogen cells that sort of go dormant when you hit menopause, turn back on. And they're not sure why that happens, but it does. So when the cells turn back on, the body interprets that as, oh, there's going to be a period again, but there's really nowhere for those cells to go. So what ends up happening is those cells become cancer cells in women who are past menopause. And that's what happened to my mother. Now, she had to have surgery. She opted to have a lumpectomy where they removed the lump, not the whole breast. And she had a long recovery period, and she just got her 10-year clearance, I guess, a few months ago. So she is good, but she has to have the specialized 3-dimensional mastectomies every year, and it's just a long, involved process. And so she went through that. One of her sisters, one of my maternal aunts, also developed cancer, breast cancer, in her 80s. And so now my risk of breast cancer is significantly higher than it was before my mother developed breast cancer. And they really can't tell you when that could happen. It could be premenopausal, postmenopause. They have no idea. They just know that my cancer increase is significantly higher now. So that's something I have to watch out for. So I was always interested in seeing and reading Ananda's updates. And I was really sad to hear that she had lost her battle and passed away. But it is something that all women need to really look at and think about and have that conversation with yourself and your loved ones now, before you are diagnosed. Because the problem is, once you are diagnosed, your brain just goes to 1,000 different places. So it's better to know beforehand what you would do in that situation. Would you want a lumpectomy like my mother had? Would you want to have a full mastectomy? Angelina Jolie went that route because her mother had breast cancer and she had what's called the BRCA gene, which makes your risk higher. So she opted to just have the double mastectomy and not deal with it at all. And then you have people like Ananda Lewis who don't want to have that double mastectomy and want to go alternative medicine. So it's better you know what your choice would be before it happens than later on. So I just wanted to remember Ananda Lewis and send prayers to her friends and her family on her death. The second death I was touched by last week was of Sylvester Stewart. Now, I'm sure a lot of you are right now going, who the heck is Sylvester Stewart? Sylvester Stewart was Sly from Sly and the Family Stone. He was a musical genius on the level of someone like Prince. He played multiple instruments. He wrote songs. He sang. He was a band leader. He was an incredibly talented person. Sly and the Family Stone came out in the very late 60s and went on to create phenomenal work through the early 1970s. The late 60s, early 70s were a very turbulent time in America. I know a lot of younger people look at the 60s as peace and love and harmony, but you also have to remember the things that were going on in the 1960s, the civil rights movement, the women's rights movement, the gay rights movement. There was Vietnam. There was Kent State in the early 70s. So America was going through a lot of growing pains, and that's the space into which Sly and the Family Stone stepped. What made the group Sly and the Family Stone fascinating just right off the bat is that they were an interracial group. That's not common even today, right? So in the late 1960s, it really did make people go, whoa, who are these people? And what do they have to say? And so Sly and the Family Stone was sort of lightning in a bottle. They were together a few years and then they broke up and Sly went his own way. Sly's life was very complicated. He had drug abuse issues, but he also had mental health issues. And sometimes the combination of those two things, drugs and mental issues, can just break a person physically, emotionally, mentally. You just go down the rabbit hole. And that really is what happened to Sly Stone. There was a point in his life where he was first living in his car, and then at some point he lost the car and he was living on the street. He was homeless. And many people could not believe that this musical genius was out in the street. And so a few years ago, Questlove from the group The Roots found Sly Stone and decided to make a documentary about him and his life and his genius. And it really is a phenomenal documentary. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. And it really does break down what happened to Sly Stone, and it's sort of a cautionary tale for musicians that you can have everything one day and have it all gone the next, especially if you're not surrounded by people who mean you well and who want the best for you. So that was the tale of the documentary. Sly Stone had 3 children. He was able to come back together with them after years of separation, and they were with him when he passed. So I was glad to hear that he had made peace and made amends with his children, and that he could die in peace, because that's super important. So I wanted to remember Sly Stone. The third person I wanted to remember is Brian Wilson, who was the genius behind the Beach Boys. Now, the Beach Boys' heyday was kind of before I was born. It was like the late 50s, early 60s. And when people talk about the, the 60s being about peace and joy and fun and having a good time, what they're talking about is Beach Boys music. Songs like Surfin' USA, God Only Knows, which, quick funny story, I heard about that song just about a month ago, is that many radio stations in southern states, so places like North Carolina, South Carolina, Louisiana, Mississippi, Tennessee, Texas, places like that, refused to play the Beach Boys song God Only Knows, because it had God in the title and in the lyrics, and they just thought that was blasphemous. Now, you know that's hilarious if you've ever heard the song. It's a love song. I mean, the chorus is, God only knows what I'd be without you. It's not a song about being mad at God, or saying God doesn't exist or anything like that. It's pretty much the exact opposite. But that was the 1960s in America. People didn't want to hear the details. They just wanted to react to things. And to me, it's pretty interesting that in 2025, we seem to be right back in that space. Nobody wants to actually hear about what happened. They just want to react to things. So that's just a quick funny story about the Beach Boys. The thing about Brian Wilson's life that really touched me was something I found out years ago, is that, like Sly Stone, Brian Wilson suffered very heavily with mental illness. There were various points in his life where he had total mental breaks and would have to be hospitalized and all sorts of things. In the 70s, Brian Wilson became friends, or became acquainted with this psychiatrist who was, for all practical purposes, a quack. And he talked Brian Wilson into doing all kinds of crazy things. And it was Brian Wilson's second wife, Melinda, who stepped in and said, okay, this ends now. And she really took control. She got him into real rehab with reputable psychiatrists. And he always credited her with saving his life, with being the person who loved him enough to force him to do things he didn't want to do, but things she knew he needed to do. After almost 30 years of marriage, she passed away first last year, and he died last week at age 82. So I also wanted to remember the life of Brian Wilson. Now, these were 3 radically different people. So what's the overall lesson from their lives? I think it's, you have to be your best advocate. And even in that, you still need at least one other person, like Brian Wilson had Melinda. You need one other person in your life to be able to say, hey, this works, this doesn't, you might want to think about this, this, and this. And if you're not in the mindset to do that, then that person has to be strong enough and has to love you enough to step in and help you do things differently. So I think that's the lesson from Ananda and Sly and Brian. So I wanted to remember the three of them in their passing last week. And I will end this episode with lines from my absolute favorite Sly and the Family Stone song. I am no better, and neither are you. People are the same, whatever we do. You love me, you hate me, you know me, and then still can't figure out the bag I'm in. I am everyday people. Yeah. I want to thank everyone for listening to this episode this week. I look forward to seeing you all again next week. If you are not subscribed to this podcast, I ask you to subscribe. There's a button down here below my head that will help you with one click to subscribe. I will see everybody again next week. Take care. Bye-bye.